afternoon, everyone. This is Dee Logan from the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research and the Systems and Psychosocial Advances Research Center. We're so happy you could join us today for our webinar with Michelle Mullen. She's going to be speaking on preventing disability among young adults with mental health conditions. Is it the condition or system effects? Before we get started, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. So please note that this broadcast is being recorded and will be available soon for viewing along with the slides on the Transitions ACR's website. If you have any electronic handheld devices, we recommend you move them away from your computer and speakers. If you have any file sharing applications open or streaming music, it may be a good idea to close those for performance. If you're experiencing any audio problems, please check your settings in the GoToWebinar audio tab. We also recommend that you if you're using the phone, make sure you enter your audio PIN. If you're having any technical difficulties, you can email me at deirdre.logan@umassmed.edu, or you can use the questions tab within GoToWebinar. We will be having a Q&A session after the presentation. Please feel free to submit your questions through the questions box as you think of them. And that's it. These are our acknowledgements and funders. And I just want to give a brief introduction for Ms. Mullen. Michelle Mullen is the newest member of the Transitions ACR and SPARC. And she's moved here recently from Rutgers in New Jersey. She is a leading expert in career development, particularly in integrating supported education into supported employment. She has worked to develop and evaluate the efficacy of educational interventions to support college students with mental health conditions, as well as to translate her interventions and findings to help organizations, counties, universities, and states to better support these young people in their career development. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Mullen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dee, for that lovely introduction. Quite a mouthful. So I just want to go over our agenda for the next hour. My discussion is really intended to provoke some thought among us as providers, as leaders of organizations, of researchers, and as people who are actually within services to reconsider what we struggle with in mental health. Is it the condition or is it system effects? And this is particularly helpful to consider how we can do things differently for young adults with mental health conditions. So first we'll talk about language. We'll move into identity formation and start to think about what treatment should actually look like for young adults. And we'll talk a little bit about how education is important to the prevention of the experience of disability, as well as facilitating entry into the primary labor market. So with that, I am going to move to our next slide. Eventually. And I want to talk a little bit about language. And, you know, it is very, very clear in our field that there has been a movement about language and how we should talk about people in particular ways. But language, not only in the type of language that we use, the individual words, but it's our primary way of expressing our beliefs and our thoughts. And the things that we say, people remember. And when we're working with young people who are developing their identities and starting to understand what service systems look like and how people treat them, it is particularly important to be mindful of our language and how we frame our interactions with young adults. So our beliefs of hope and change is possible should be articulated through our language, and we really should be very, very, very mindful of the types of language and services that we create for young adults. We don't want to bathe them in this idea of illness, of sickness, of disability, something that is long-lasting. The identities that we help young people to develop early on are long-lasting. So we should be thinking about how do we create the language within ourselves and the language that we use with young people so that they are creating themselves and being able to think about themselves being resilient, strength-based, wellness-focused. So language is our building block for this. So think about whether our language is constructive or destructive. So these are some of our favorites. And think about for yourself, like how often do you use these? For the providers in the room or the academics, the researchers, like consider when you use the word inappropriate or high and low functioning. What does inappropriate mean? Does that tell you anything? Like if I say you're acting inappropriately, what does that mean? What it means is that you don't like what I'm saying. I don't like what you're doing. It doesn't actually help a young person or any person to understand what am I specifically doing that is not approved of here. So when thinking about what language we use, this is not a constructive term. It doesn't help someone to understand their behavior, their actions, and what are the ramifications and implications of those. So if you were to say something like, you know, Jimmy, it's not really a good place to talk about dating girls here. So why don't we reserve that for when you're hanging out with your guy friends and talking to them? So that is a helpful in a setting where Jimmy may have been talking about things that were better for his boys than for a mixed group. So thinking about how we use language can actually help young people to better understand the things that are socially normative, that are expected. Or so thinking about language is not just, you know, we don't use the word bipolar, you're a bipolar or you're a borderline. We know that. But thinking about language in this larger term. One of the things that became really clear to me was this high and low functioning. High and low functioning at one point was supposed to be complementary to a person. Oh, they're high functioning. Well, what does that actually mean? What does low functioning mean? And in what settings is someone like doing really well and not doing very well? So our language may not necessarily be as helpful and may actually be kind of polarizing. So when you say that someone is high functioning, you mean that they're doing well and it's well intended. But what that translates into is it becomes very risky for a young person or any person to then ask for help or to slide backwards or to start experiencing greater symptoms. Because then if they say something like, I'm really struggling, does that then move them from high functioning to low functioning? So the way that we talk about people has this trickle-down effect, and people start to pick up on our language. So when we start using our language, we should think about how we think about ourselves in relaying our language and the messages that we're sending. So language should be label-free, it should be constructive, it should be instructive, right? And so that people better understand how their behavior affects their ability to achieve their goals. This was my aha moment. I have lots of them, but this is my aha moment. So we were doing an interview with a young adult for HYPE, which I'll tell you about in a little bit. And this is what she said when we were asking her some things related to work. She was talking about her experience with a state VR counselor, and she said, they're like, just get a job. Oh, congratulations, you're working at ShopRite. That's not a job. I mean, it is, but it's not really. It's not a self-sustaining job. You can't live off that. I don't think they know how to help because they don't have a lot of clients that are high functioning but still struggling. They're big time struggling. So this woman is a 26-year-old with a bachelor's degree in fine arts. Do you know of any 26-year-old with a bachelor's degree of fine arts without a mental health condition that would ever describe themselves as high functioning? We think we talk about these things among ourselves, and people that we work with aren't affected by our language. But this woman, a 26-year-old, is describing herself in terms that are not clinical. They do not describe anything specific or helpful, but it's a category and a label that people use to say, hey, she's able to do something. So language is important, and is one way in which we help people to develop identities. is also another mechanism by the way that we affect people. So the question is, how much do we see in mental health services? Is it condition or is it system effect? So I want for you folks to think about a couple of things. What happens after a person's first significant episode of a mental health condition? Where do they go? Where do they receive treatment from? What are the messages that we send? What are the recommendations of the mental health system? And as a system, what do we do? What are the types of messages we send to people and family who seek our services? So often when someone comes into with a significant episode of a mental health condition, we ask for them to, all right, stop doing things that are stressful. You probably can't go to school. Work is not a good idea. You should come to services and focus on your symptoms. And as a system, we then bring them into services and isolate them from other roles that may be important to their wellness, may be important to their identity. So they need treatment, they need help, but what are the messages that we actually send? So when you start to think through these questions, I want you to think about, well, what's the type of language we use? What do we suggest they focus on? What resources do we suggest that they get connected to? And what times are we available? So what you start to consider is that we tell people to come during working hours. Our services are typically between 9 and 4. As more RFPs come out and our systems evolve, we have these 24-hour, access to care. But most traditional mental health services are during business hours. So they need to leave work. They need to leave school. We know of some programs that mandate that they come to program every day, and they can't go to school until they're cleared. So when you start to think about what happens after someone experiencing something distressing, there's this triggering effect that not only is there something distressing happening to them, but then they start to lose all these valuable roles that are really a part of a young person's identity. And then we start to hear messages sent to people like what? You're too sick to go to school. You're too sick to work. These start to become a very pervasive message for anyone. So system effects are what I consider to be the unintended consequences of receiving services. Anyone that comes into mental health services as a practitioner, provider, clinician, a supporter, their intention is to help. But not all providers are trained adequately, and sometimes what we think is helpful may actually be harmful in the long term. So system effects are typically a result of uninformed or poorly planned mental health services and are underdeveloped practitioner skill, knowledge, or attitude. So this is coupled because there's inadequate resources that are identified for community-based psych rehab services that help people manage their mental health condition while maintaining valued roles. It is much more difficult to get back into something than to stay in something. So we send messages, we encourage people leaving these roles, and we focus on illness. We focus on, let's talk about your symptoms. Let's talk about anger management. Let's talk about these factors that are probably real for a lot of people. But does it make the most sense to bathe them in that all day, or does it make the most sense to be able to integrate that into their world, into the world that they're doing, what they're looking to achieve? One of the most significant triggering effects or triggering of system effects is the encouragement for Social Security. So Social Security is often a common thing that we suggest people apply for when entering into services because for multiple reasons. And one of the main ones is so that we can be reimbursed for services. The second, when asking practitioners, why do you encourage a young person to sign up for SSI? They say so they have something to fall back on, that they don't have to worry, that they always have money. So when we start to think about that, it starts to create a very different picture for us. When you think about Social Security, most people do not get accepted on the first time. Most people don't get accepted on the second time. So what we have is third-time applications and months and months and months and years of people declaring that they are too sick to work. So knowing what SSI pays, you also then trigger another series of dependencies on the system. When you make a certain amount of money, well, the things that you can afford are dictated by the amount of money you have. So Social Security then triggers mental health system dependency, and largely that's due to poverty. So when you start to think about the barriers that adults with mental health conditions have, it may not be the condition, but it may be more likely to be associated with poverty and the lack of opportunities. So what happens is after we entrench people in these experiences and we encourage them, leave school, it's too stressful, don't work, it's too stressful, let's talk about your symptoms, let's get you connected, why don't you come here every day, you'll get the support that you need, all well intended. But what happens is that you start to focus on things that are probably also unintended, which is only illness. So what happens over time is that these system effects become erroneously aligned with symptoms, evidence of poor prognosis, or it becomes a character trait. Oh, that person doesn't want to work. He's lazy. He's not motivated. I think to myself, is that really why he doesn't want to work? So let's think about this. Think about your life, and imagine that I take away your job and any of your money, and I give you $750. What would your life look like as an adult? Maybe as a teenager, 20-year-old, $750 feels like a lot of money. But what if you were 40 living on $750? Would you be able to pay your rent or your mortgage? Would you be able to buy groceries? I often give this example of being able to go to movies. It's very expensive. Would you be able to do any of these things? But more so, if you lived on $750 a month, would you feel secure? Would you feel like you are cared for? Financial stress is real stress, and poverty is a disabling condition. So when we ask providers, why do you help someone, a young person, enroll in SSI? Their response is so that they don't have to worry. But you actually do have to worry a lot if you only have $750 a month to live on. So think about the unintended messages that we send. When we, as providers, believe that Social Security, this SSA application, not even the receipt of cash benefits, we want people to have insurance. I want to be very, very clear. We want people to have insurance. We do not necessarily want people to have cash benefits tied to insurance. But let's think about the unintended messages associated with the SSA application. What is the first thing that you have to say to get Social Security, to get SSI? You have to say that you're too sick to work. We encourage people to say that. We encourage people to say that they're too sick to do the things that their friends are doing. And then we coach them. Oh, you can't go to work. Remember we put in that SSA application. So month after month, people are too sick to work, too sick to work, too sick to work. Even if you didn't have a mental health condition, if you needed to say that to yourself and then believe it to get insurance and cash benefits, you would become too sick to work. We also talk about people that they're permanently disabled. So not only am I too sick to work right now, I am permanently disabled. As a young person, imagine being 19, 20 years old, hearing that language. And we wonder why we don't have people who come back to services. I wouldn't come back either. I wouldn't want to. So thinking about why young adults are disengaged in services, this is not a surprise. The people that stay are the people that we're trapping and the people that we're helping to create this identity of sickness, of illness, of too sick to work, of being permanently disabled. But then here's this pervasive message that we send, which is, do you remember how hard it was to get? Do you remember how long it took to get it? You need to protect it. Do not give up your Social Security. Because then what would happen? You would be unemployed. You would have no money. So initially, our intention was to help people have a safety net so that they didn't have to worry. But now what we have is a trap. Now we're telling them, don't give it up. Don't give it up. And if you think that you're going to go to work, sorry. And if you think you're going to go to work, don't work too much, because then you'll lose it. So thinking about how what we used to do for adults just automatically needs to change when working with young adults. This creation and the development of this disability identity starts with us. Most young adults that come into services that need help never use this language. They never say high functioning. They never say disabled. They never say disability. Like they don't say these words. We help them to develop this language. We create the illness identity, and then we think we're going to fix it. So young people are not necessarily interested in symptoms and diagnoses and medication adherence and compliance. I'm not interested in that. Well, I'm not young anymore, but I can pretend. But think about it. They're not interested in talking about that. They talk about, I'm having a really hard time. I can't do this. My thoughts are going crazy. I can't get control of myself. I'm yelling at people. I hate my job. That's what they talk about. But we use language that is overly clinical and creates a disability. We train them to think about therapy and appointments and treatment. But what we should be thinking about is, how do we change our language and our focus to what's important to them? Because if you start changing your language and your approach, then you can do all the treatment, all the appointments, all the medication stuff within the confines of work and school and relationships and housing. We don't have to create another generation of people that have the same concerns and issues as the older adults in our mental health service system. We have the ability to change the narrative with this group. So what we need to start to consider is, how intentional are we in our outcomes, right? So we think about ourselves as recovery oriented. We help people manage their illnesses. We help people go back to work and back to school. But is that actually what we're doing? Or are we creating illness? Are we creating disability? What's more disabling than a mental health condition is poverty. So thinking about our service systems, we should have a different service profile for these two groups. We have young adults and we have mature adults. There's some debate among our group about, is it mature adults, is it not young adults? I don't know. Older adults, but no one likes that language. So I use mature adults for now, but if you have feedback, please let me know. So for young adults, our focus should really be on prevention of long-term disability. Our focus should be to keep them where they are, however slow the movement is. If you're in school, I don't care if you're taking one class a semester, we'll get you up there. I don't care if you're working part-time, we'll get you there. We can do that. So maintaining developmentally normative pathways is critical. Do not take them out of the roles that we then later, when they're 40, try to get them back into. Prevent disruption. Teach resiliency. Teach skills. I ask people in my presentations, like, if I took your calendar away, what would you do? Would you know where to go tomorrow? And most people would be like, absolutely not. I wouldn't know what I'm doing. But yet, these are not the skills that we teach young adults. We make appointments for them. We pick them up at their residential houses, and we then take them to their appointments. So thinking about, how do we teach resiliency? How do we teach self-regulation and self-management skills? They don't need us. They don't need to be dependent on us. There'll always be someone else with a mental health condition. But then if we create these services that help them, that make them resilient, make them strong, right? develop skills that help them regulate not only their own emotions, but goal-directed behavior. What do I want to do? How do I get there? Who do I need to support me in doing that? And if you're a good mental health supporter, they'll come back. They'll never leave because they need you to do the things that they really want to do. And that's what we want to do too. We want to be able to connect people to services and natural community support that support them just like any other young adult without a mental health condition. Why are we creating dependency on us when there are a lot of things that people can take advantage of? So in the young adult model, this is a prevention model. When people talk about recovery for young adults, I think that's kind of getting ahead of the game. We actually don't want that. It's discovery, right? It's prevention. Like this can be a part of who you are. It's a part of your identity. It doesn't have to be your identity. You have lots and lots of facets of your identity, but your mental health condition does not have to be the entire thing. But when you think about the mature adults in our system or the older adults in our system, what we're trying to do is really undo system effects. No, you know what, Jamal, you can go to work. Let's figure that out. You want to go back to school? We can do that. So we're instilling hope in people that change is possible. But young adults already know change is possible. That's what they want. They don't want to be the same. So in the mature system, in the system that we're helping older adults, this is recovery. This is helping kind of set back time, right? Developing positive beliefs about the future, creating opportunities for success, helping people to exit SSI. So what we have here are two models. And you need to ask yourself, are you doing a prevention model for young adults? Or are you providing the same level of services, the same types of services, with the same language to young adults as you are to older adults? And if you're here in this bucket and you're realizing that you're doing that, that's okay, because there's time to change. But thinking about how critical this is we do not want to create another generation of young adults with mental health conditions. So for those of you who may know me, you know my perception is that employment and education is the key to avoiding disability. It's what everyone does at this age, right? Everyone's going to school, everyone's working. It's a part of your vocational maturity. Think about that first job you had. It was terrible. You'd never want to do it again, right? Every terrible job helps you to identify, this is what I like, this is what I did not like. So sometimes we try to protect people by saying, like, oh, that job's not good for you. It's a terrible job. Quit it. Leave it. And sometimes our intention to protect people actually makes things worse. We want to be able to create those muscles of work hardening and figuring out, like, you know what, even though my job stinks, I can still do it. So even if my job stinks, I can still do it. Sorry, I had a little glitch on my technology. So with involvement in school and work, what we start to do is to create alternate identities or reaffirm identities for young adults. We help them to think through, what do I like about myself? Can I do this? If I can get through one tough semester, I can get through another tough semester, right? So not only do you start to know about yourself and about other people, I really like hanging out with these types of people in class. I don't like hanging out with those types of people. When we start to think about what employment education does for young adults, it creates skills that allow them to live like a very good life with support, you know? So we know that people need help to stay in school, but what's the help that we provide? We provide support and we provide skill training, right? So thinking about what happens when you take young adults out of these roles, though, is that we start to develop other types of identities, which is, I'm not a worker. I don't have social networks, right? So thinking about where you make your friends, that's at school and work. You don't have as many opportunities if you're not a part of these environments. So for me, thinking about how do we avoid disability, it's how do you weave services into these kind of developmentally normative pathways? So how do we help people develop wellness plans and coping strategies? You do that when something they really like is in jeopardy, right? Or preparing for something that they really like to be like, okay, this is what we're doing. How are we going to stay there? What are the things that, this worked really well the last time. Let's try that again. Or this didn't work so well. Why don't we think through some other ideas? Partnering with folks and thinking about how do you make success. And success is both by coaching, by skills, by encouragement, and our language. So creating multiple identities and not just one of illness and disability. So I'm going to show one of my favorite videos. And this is this guy, Ryan, who I hope I get to meet him one day. I want you to listen to his narrative and think about what would you do if you were serving Ryan in services.
Hi, my name is Ryan. I'm 34 years old. I work full-time as a civil rights advocate for individuals with mental health disabilities in a state psychiatric hospital. I recently graduated with a master's degree. I happen to drive a nice automobile. I'm single, enjoy dating, and I'm also in recovery from a form of schizophrenia. And today I'd like to talk to you about how I returned to school. This is the picture of me when I showed up on the first day of classes to have my student ID taken. I was overweight, disheveled, poorly groomed, and the thing that strikes me most about this picture is in my eyes, I can feel what it was like back then. I can see the hopelessness, sort of despair, in the picture. I definitely wasn't happy. On many days, I sort of wished that life would just go away, that I were dead. It was too painful. One of my main fears was that I would never be able to work. This process of going back to school is futile, being a person with, a major mental disorder, to actually go through this process of going back to school. But I made the decision that I was going to go and study what I wanted to study and pursue my own education, actually, to pursue knowledge for knowledge's sake, despite the fact that I believed that I couldn't work. In the midst of that 7 years that I was in college, I was hospitalized at my most ill moment. I had teachers that were very supportive and allowed me to make up the work. And I was able to take incompletes for those semesters. The support of my family, friends, and my professors was enough when I was hospitalized to allow me to believe that that wasn't the end of the road. The stress of school never put me in the hospital. I'd say the stress of believing I couldn't achieve at school because I'm a person with a mental illness probably was more stressing to me than the stress of finals and final papers and things like that. I didn't think I was able to work, and so I didn't. It was sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. After I finished my bachelor's degree, I worked successfully for a year before I started a master's program, and I actually completed the master's program in 2.5 years, which was the standard time as opposed to the extra length it took for me to finish a bachelor's degree. And I worked full-time and went to school full-time at the master's level and completed that in a timely fashion. From my experience, I guess I'd encourage anyone to go back to school who's thinking about it. It's such a crucial aspect of my recovery that I think education can be an arena where anyone can sort of discover who they are, discover what they're passionate about. And I'd say through the process of education, we sort of become more ourselves by learning what we're able to do. I guess I didn't know who or what I could be until I started learning exactly what I could do in the world and then doing it.
So who cares? Who cares what I have to say when that guy can say it, right? I mean, sheesh. So I want you to think about Ryan, and I want you to think about what he looked like in his ID. Would you have supported Ryan? Or would you have told him that he was not ready for school? Would you suggest that he needed to focus on his symptoms or his ADLs? So when we start to think about the messages, it may be well-intended. We don't want people to fail. But sometimes we have to think about, failure is not a terrible thing. It teaches you something. But more so is that we should support people in their attempts Because what if they can be successful? And often people are successful despite us. So what happens if we did the right thing and that we were able to explore people's interests in school and coordinated care to support his enrollment and think about what his wellness plan would look like and help him think through accommodations? We would have more people like Brian graduating from school, driving nice vehicles, enjoying dating, right? So thinking about what could have happened to Ryan should he had not either had the right support or the self-efficacy or determination, thinking about that helps to shape that not everybody, when they look like they're well, has always looked like that. But we should be hopeful and thinking about how do we help progress this person. Any movement forward is good movement. So when I think about preventing disability, I think about the importance of higher education. Because not only does it allow a lot of movement, greater access to better jobs, money, benefits, education does other things. Education provides a valued role, a valued identity. It allows people to socialize. It allows people to network. It is a normalizing role. One time when I was providing services to a young adult, she had said, college is hard. It's just so hard. And she was crying. And I said, college is hard for everybody. And she told me later, this was her aha moment. She thought college was hard because she had a mental health condition. But then she told me, once I realized it was hard for everyone, I was like, oh, this is hard for everyone. It's not just me. So thinking about that it's prestigious, it's normalizing, it allows you to socialize, it allows you to network. The people you meet in college are the people you also help to get you jobs later, right? It's the professors, they get you connected to a good job. So, but one of the best things about education, in my opinion, not only does it offer benefits and places to live and things like that, but one of the best things about education as we're helping people move through this kind of like tumultuous time of their 20s and the onset of conditions and the kind of the movement of diagnoses, because it changes. Course loads can be adjusted by semester. We're able, if someone is doing great and, developing and building on previous successes, and they can take 4 classes and then they move to 5 classes and they can maintain 5 classes, that's amazing. But sometimes you can't do that. So you can change your course load, right? You can reduce the number of classes you're taking, or you can take 1 3-hour class instead of 3 45-minute classes, or other way around. So course loads can be adjusted by semester and even intersessions. But think about it. If you're having a hard time personally or with your mental health condition or anything, you can't call your boss and be like, you know what, boss? For the next 3 months, I'm going to be coming in on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1:30 to 3, so I'll see you then. You can't do that. You get fired. But in school, you can. So sometimes when we think we're protecting people by encouraging them not to work and not to go to school because it's too stressful, the act of not doing anything is stressful. It makes everybody sick. But school is a great option because you can actually tailor it to both your working needs, your personal needs, your financial needs. School is tailorable. And what school does is that it prevents disability and it prevents the enrollment in Social Security. So what I want you to see here is the department, the BLS, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And this is for folks that are over 25. So entered into the labor market, people are graduating from college later and later. But I want you to look at the unemployment rate. So this is 2017. This always comes out like it's a year after the current year so that they can aggregate data. But let's look at the employment rate. Employment rate here, this dotted line down the center is the average for all folks in the U.S. over 25. So the unemployment rate for those of us in 2017 that did not have a high school diploma, you are 6.5% of unemployed. Unemployment rate of those folks, 6.5%. That's 3.6 is the average. So as you start to move from lack of education to higher education, you see you become more and more insulated from unemployment as you gain higher education. I want you to think back to our discussion earlier about why practitioners suggest people enroll in SSI. Remember, it's so that they never have to worry about money and that they don't have to worry about periods of unemployment. But look at where people are at the highest rates of unemployment. This is with a little education. So the more education you gain, the more insulated you are from unemployment. Now, please don't get mad. Some of you may. But look at this on the right-hand side. This is weekly earnings. So if you guys are doing the math for yourself, you may be a little annoyed by your current position. But all workers in the U.S. had an average a weekly earning of $907. Look here at Lesson High School. You can see that even people with a high school diploma or some college make more money than Social Security. But look at what happens when you cross the divide. Here we cross the divide at an associate's degree. You're insulated from unemployment. Here we cross the divide at a bachelor's degree. So not only when you gain higher education do you make more money, this is not surprising, but what it also does is insulates you from unemployment. Now you'll say, well, it's 2017, things are good for everybody. They are. But I tried to go back as far as I could. But let's look at what happened in 2010. Our unemployment rate was 8.2%. But look at when we crossed the divide, the same places, right? From associate's degree, we are insulated from unemployment. And when we cross the bachelor's degree, we make more money than the average person. So when you consider this, education insulates people, protects them from unemployment and from poverty. So if we want to consider how do we prevent disability, we prevent disability by helping people get their education and helping people get their education early. So what we know is that the only thing that predicts work, the future of work, is previous work. If we create identities of workers, what we're doing is helping people to think like that. I'm a worker. That's what I do. If I get fired, I have to get myself another job. Maybe taking a week break is cool, but I need to work. We also know that educational achievement is both predictive of employment and income. And this is true for people with mental health conditions as well. So one of the things that we need to ask ourselves, though, is that we know unemployment makes everyone sick, everyone, with or without mental health conditions. So we need to ask ourselves, why do we think that people we serve should actually get better under the same conditions that makes everyone else sick? It doesn't make sense. We need to start thinking about our services and our treatment differently. So for those of you that know me, you also know I talk a lot. This is also true in this instance. So I do want to leave a little bit of time for us to be able to ask some questions. So if you guys can start thinking about if you have any questions to share, that would be great. I do want to talk a little bit about why career development is so important. And remember that slide earlier where I had the different foci for young adults and older adults and how difficult it is for those of you who work in support employment, support education, or if you're in day treatment programs, you know how hard it is to help people return to work. But it may not necessarily be harder to help older folks to return to work because of their mental health condition. It may be harder to help them return to work because of all the workforce liabilities, age of returning to work, poor social networks, higher education, consistent work history. Those are the things that we can affect. So we focus on career development so that people don't struggle later in life. Social Security and all these other workforce liabilities get in the way of what we see as a recovery model. If you ask someone, what are you working towards as a practitioner? When do you know that someone's recovered? Some people may say, oh, they stay out of the hospital. Oh, they take their medication. That's not what we're working for. We're working for people to return to meaningful adult lives. But the question is, how do we do that if this is what we create when they're younger? So thinking about why we concentrate on career development when people are young is so that we minimize workforce liabilities. Unfortunately, our current services thinks about things a little bit differently. And even in supported employment, we're often working within the context of Social Security. We're helping people to maintain their benefits and helping them to work a little. We want to change this for young adults. They don't have to work a little. They have to work a lot and be happy at what they do. It doesn't feel like work if you help someone to be able to align a job and a career with something that they're interested in. So at another time, maybe we'll talk about labor markets, but essentially we want to move people from this kind of secondary labor market where people are when they're younger and move them into the primary labor market where people should be when they're older. So these lots of older adults don't want to go back to work because they're in this kind of secondary labor market. Wendy's, McDonald's, the Wawa, 7-Eleven. That's fine when you're young. Remember, we're building that vocational maturity. What do I like? What do I dislike? Those jobs are short term. Primary labor market jobs, however, offer something a little bit different for us. What they offer to young adults and to older adults are jobs that naturally accommodate for cyclical conditions. Think about it. When you go to work, if you don't go to work tomorrow, it doesn't matter. You have vacation time. You have personal time. If you don't go to work for 3 days, you bring a doctor's note. You still have your job when you're in the primary labor market. If you're working at McDonald's or the Wawa and you don't go to work for 3 days, you don't have a job on the 4th day. So what we should be thinking about is how do we set people up in 10 years? They don't need us. It's not right now. How do we build skills right now? But what are we working towards? How do we create intentional services? We want to be able to move people into the primary labor market so that that labor market takes care of this kind of cyclical condition. There's accommodations, there's FMLA, there are built-in benefits that allow people to keep their jobs. Remember that graph? Well-paying jobs, that they have insurance, that they can go to the movies, that they can pay for care, they can have a nice vehicle and like dating, right? That's what we want. When we think about the services we want to create, that's it. So one of the things that we need to consider then is what's treatment. Treatment should be what gets people better and what helps people to create meaningful, good lives. So if school and work are targeted of all of our services, we then get to see career development as treatment and integrate services so that young adults want to come and they want to talk to a therapist and they want to, work on DBT techniques, right? We want that and they want it too. We just have to use our language and be engaging and be helpful so that they want to take it from us, that we don't shame them for quitting their job. We say, oh, sheesh, that must have been a terrible job. Okay, so what did we learn about that and what are we not going to do again? That is helpful. So once we start to change our perspective of what treatment is, what makes someone well, once we understand what gets in the way of their goal, we can be more effective practitioners. So once we change our perspective of treatment, we also change the outcomes of services. So I'm not going to talk a lot about HYPE, but I think that you understand career development is my focus. And the identity, the purpose of HYPE, which is helping youth on the path to employment, is developed to answer these issues. And the focus is really on, as early as we can, help people get or stay in school because it pays off over a longer period of time. HYPE services are designed intentionally to prevent disruption, right? So we help to develop skills that are based in self-regulation, executive functioning skills, time management, prioritizing tasks, the things that you actually need to be successful. We help people think through the implications, right? Like, all right, so what are we struggling with in class or at work? Is there an accommodation? Is there assistive technology? What can we do? And the aim then is to prevent enrollment in Social Security. I don't even want people to apply because the application of applying, that makes no sense. The application alone triggers the thought of disability. So people need insurance. We help them to get insurance. But if you focus as long on getting someone SSI as you did on employment and education, 18 months, you could do a lot. So HYPE is intended to do those things. And it's intended to develop multiple identities so that people don't just see themselves as, oh, I have a condition, I'm ill, I have a disability. when a young person says those things to me, I think, what did we do to you? And how am I going to undo it? I'm going to do it. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to do it. But we want to prioritize education so that we can develop and reinforce these alternate identities. When a student, an artist, an athlete, I threw in a hiker. I don't know if many people like to hike, but hiker, writer, engineer, people can have all these identities at once, not just a mental health condition. We want to create intentional services that focus on getting to the goal. If you want to date, you need money to date. How do we get that, right? So thinking about where we want people to be and how we get them there, that's intentional, that's strategic, it's purposeful. That's what we should be doing all the time. So we focus on the prevention of dropout of both school and work. We want people to stay in school and work, school and work, school and work. That's how you create what we call human capital, your resume. Not only does it make you interesting and helps you like to build friendships and network, but it also allows you to prevent disability, both the identity and the experience, because poverty is disability. So after a recent training, it was a couple of years ago, a young adult came up to me after the training and was like, have you seen this meme? And I was like, what meme? She's like, the goal meme. I was doing goal training. And she texted me this meme after she showed it to me. She's like, this is what people think it is, right? This really clean line. She's like, but this is what it is really. And it's true. It's a messy process. It's messy, but the outcome is a good outcome. So if we start thinking about ourselves in ways to be flexible and responsive to young adults with this goal of prevention of disability, of having them develop meaningful careers that afford them a lifestyle that can afford wellness, we are in a really good position. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. And maybe some of you folks have some questions or comments or thoughts that you would like to share. As hopefully there are some. I thought that would be a good problem to have. So as you are looking through our folks looking through the comments or questions, our next slide, if someone can click on the next slide. If you want more information on HYPE, we have a temporary website that you can go see. But I thank you. So I don't know who's managing the questions, but do we have any or thoughts or comments?
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much. That was a really awesome presentation. We do have several questions. I'm going to let Marcia kind of help facilitate since she is a co-PI on HYPE with you.
Well, thank you, Dee. Thank you, Marcia.
Well, we have one comment. When you were describing the inability to get, how mental health services appointments tend to be right in the midst of working and learning prime time. And someone commented, how do we make a change so that people have access to resources that they need while they can still maintain their appropriate roles in the community?
I love that question / comment. We've had some discussions about this. In the same way that there's day treatment, there also could be evening treatment. It doesn't have to be during the day. So if we think about how we can be flexible, I had this discussion with one of my colleagues, and she said, so what are you going to do? Serve dinner? And I thought, well, we serve people lunch. Why can't we serve them dinner? So sometimes we do services just because that's the way we've always done it. But we don't actually have to do it like that. If we're tailoring our services to young adults, why not have evening programming? Why not have some weekend stuff? Like thinking about that, it does make it more difficult because your providers are older with children and lives. But we shouldn't be creating services that are better for the providers. We should be creating services that are best for the people that we're trying to serve. So thinking about what that means in mental health, we can be as creative as we want. We respond to states and Medicare's RFPs all the time in crafting services. So if we get a bunch of young adults together and say, hey, what would it look like if we created services like this? What would you want? What would have been really helpful to you when you were in high school or just leaving high school? How do we do that? You have people that want to provide input. Tap them. Young adults have amazing ideas. You know, sometimes they're better than ours, and often they are. But what happens is if you put both of those people in a group of people in a room together, you get ethically good ideas. So just because we've always done something some way doesn't mean we have to continue to do it. So I appreciate that comment, question. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. We have another couple of comments that are related and is asking, what is your suggestion for how to teach young adults to support themselves financially until they are able to obtain employment with a sustainable wage? And a related comment that many young people who are served don't have the financial support of their families. So while encouraging Social Security is a bad idea, how else are we to expect young people to support themselves?
I think these are all really good ideas and questions. And, you know, the sad part is that there is inadequate funding for supported employment and career development services in most states. So while people struggle financially, the answer isn't necessarily Social Security, to your participant's point, right? But it's how do we provide the level of support that is needed to be able to get someone to work or school. So one of the things that I would encourage people to think about is the application to Social Security takes about 18 months. So if someone is struggling with finances, Social Security is actually not the answer. So there's some temporary, like TANF, like some states have gotten rid of it, but there's some temporary financial assistance, GA, that you can get people with TANF, not anymore, but you can get people connected to. But the other thing is, this is why school may be a really good option for some people. Because if you're living in poverty and you have a school that's local to you, you actually get a lot of financial aid. We can work with our VR system to be able to fund the stuff that's not covered. So if people are struggling with living, with food, with benefits, college actually provides all of those things. So if it's not college, if someone's not interested in college, we can cultivate that. But the application to SSI doesn't give money right away. So what do we do in those 18 months when someone doesn't get it? The answer is, like, we make it work. But the other thing is, maybe we need to advocate that supported employment or employment services is not only done by supported employment offices. If you don't have one, what can practitioners do? What can any practitioner do? You know, in thinking about this webinar, I had suggested that maybe it's a good idea for those people who are interested to host this discussion, to have a discussion hour, maybe next week or the following week, where we can have a live conversation and think through these things. But one of the coolest things I think about right now is we are at a tipping point between what do systems need to look like, and what should systems look like. And so reconsidering what these roles are, I think, are really important. And so I appreciate that you folks are thinking about this. So if we're interested in having a discussion hour with no presentation, just talking, I'd be interested in doing that.
Well, that sounds awesome, Michelle. We do have a variety of other questions, and we are also out of time. So I do want to say that we will forward everyone else's questions that we received. So if you didn't have a chance to hear Michelle reply on the webinar, she will receive your question by email and hopefully give you a quick reply as well. So, or a discussion or a discussion hour, which is a wonderful idea.
Well, thank you everyone for attending this afternoon. The webinar video and slides will be posted on the Transition ACR's website probably within the next 2 weeks. And please, if you haven't signed up for our newsletter and e-blast, we have another webinar coming up on June 13th that will be talking about how to create for the benefits of having a young adult counsel. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Bye. Thank you.